We begin here. Investigations are continuing into the deaths of 3 people in a drive-by shooting at Inanda, north of Durban yesterday. Unconfirmed reports indicate that the group had been attending an ANC committee meeting in the area. 5 other people were injured in the incident. Now, provincial police say that a group of people were standing at the front gate of the Buhlabetu primary school in Inanda when a black Opel Corsa Baki with 5 occupants drove by the school. According to witnesses, the occupants of the vehicle opened fire on the group with handguns before fleeing from the police. Police say they are investigating 3 cases of murder and 5 of attempted murder and cannot confirm the motive behind the shooting at this stage. Now, let's discuss this further. We are joined via Zoom by political analyst, Prof Bheki Mngomezulu. Prof, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Now, Prof, while the motive of the killing is not immediately clear, taking into context the historical political violence in KwaZulu-Natal and how these upcoming elections have been handled so far, what's your immediate thinking around what we are witnessing there?
No, thank you for having me, my sister. Honestly speaking, this is a cause for concern, more especially given the history of the province in terms of violent attacks and violent killings. And normally what happens is closer to the election, a lot of things happen, a combination of factors converge, and then we end up speculating as to what the causal factors might be. In this case, of course, there are speculations that these killings might be associated with the nominations or the elections for the 2021 local government elections. But the reality of the matter is there are people who have issues, but they don't act and they wait for the election time so that whenever they kill their targets, it will appear as if it is political violence. So in this case, I think what will help us is if the police officials could, in fact, speed up the pace of establishing what the causal factors are, and then, of course, apprehend the perpetrators. Because the longer it takes for them to do that, the more killings you might see for different reasons. And then the main reason that will be put forth will be that it's related to the forthcoming elections.
I mean, Prof, you mentioned some very interesting points. I also want to just take you on that last comment that we are likely to see more violence, but you're not necessarily pegging this all on political violence. Talk to me about how concerned then the people of KZN need to be, particularly because they will be queuing to vote in the not so distant future.
No, people of KwaZulu-Natal have to be concerned, my sister, honestly speaking. For a number of reasons. One, you have what we normally refer to as intra-party conflicts. In other words, conflicts that happen within each political party. In this case, we might be talking about the governing party, the ANC, given the recent events that have just happened with staff that have not been paid, with the nomination list disputes and all related matters, of course, including the factions that are already there in the party. We may be talking about that, but the reality of the matter is that there could be many other reasons as to why people kill one another. So on the eve of an election, these things happen, and then people who just have their own differences, some of them, in fact, you may find that they had differences in their rural areas, but because they reside in urban areas like eThekwini, for instance, so if someone is killed in eThekwini, there will be no association with what had happened in the rural areas. So that is why I think it's important for the police officials to do the investigations sooner than later, so that at least we can eliminate some of these causal factors. Because if that remains unresolved, then of course it means that when people go to the elections, they will go there in an uncomfortable situation. Some of them might even decide not to go there simply because they are fearing for their lives. So the sooner we act, the better.
Let's look at the violence in that province. I mean, I'm immediately taken to the book that was written by Greg Ade. It's called The War Party book, where he specifically talked about political violence, but also not so much politically related, where in the 1980s and in the 1990s, we saw a breed of hitmen, or otherwise known as Izinkaba, in that province. Is that perhaps what you are also talking about?
No, indeed, because if I have issues with you, I will wait for the right moment for me to strike. And then when it's election time, anyone who gets killed around that time, then the assumption will be that such a killing is associated with the elections, when in fact it has nothing to do with that. You saw this happening with the so-called hostile violence, where a number of people were killed. And in all likelihood, you'll find that some of those killings had nothing to do with what was happening in the hostels, but then had everything to do with what had happened outside of the hostels, and in fact outside of eThekwini Metro, but then things that had happened elsewhere. You also find people who just have their own grudges, old grudges that have been there, but then they didn't either fight back or revenge for one reason or the other, and then they wait for the opportune moment for them to do that. So if then you don't understand what is happening, you are most likely to make speculations. And normally those speculations don't assist us as a country, because we keep acting on something which we think is the causal factor, only to find that we are leaving out the real causal factor, which will then mean that the violence will continue. And the other thing, of course, is retaliation. Once someone has been killed, that person has a family, has relatives, has political comrades. So those people will definitely, in all likelihood, are most likely to avenge the death of their loved one. So it is important then that whenever this happens, we act speedily so that we eliminate some of those other, offsprings of the main problem. So that is my view.
Just on the back of what happened in July with the unrest, specifically hard hit was KwaZulu-Natal. Are then our national enforcement law authorities, can they handle this situation? Should it escalate? Are they ill-equipped? Do we have confidence that they will be able to handle these sporadic incidences that we really don't know the motive of, as you say, currently?
No, I think what happened in July, in fact, should be a lesson to the country. And I'm a bit optimistic because you might have heard that there were rumors that on the 23rd of last month, something similar was going to happen. But because the security cluster was awake this time, they were able to prevent that incident from happening. So I think that it's up to the security cluster to make sure that they execute their mandate diligently. This includes the police, the army, and then, of course, our state security. Because it's more important for us to pick up these issues before someone is killed. To wait until someone is dead then doesn't help us, because those who have lost a family member might not, in fact, be in a position to listen to the officials. And in a worst case scenario, they may decide to take the law into their own hands. But if we pick up this information before someone gets killed, then of course we are most likely to have a peace in the country, because no one is going to die, because we'll have averted what would have been a disastrous situation. So I think the onus is on the security cluster to up its game and make sure that they are ready. Whether they are well prepared right now, I cannot say with certainty, but given what I have just referred to on the 23rd, I think that they now have a better plan than they did in July when the events happened in KwaZulu-Natal and, of course, in Gauteng.
Prof, I'd like us to revisit the motive. If it is a political motive, and it's a big if, judging from what you are saying, how has the ANC handled, just the run-up to these elections that we're seeing, particularly seeing that they've missed registering their candidates in 3 huge districts in KZN, and we know that the people who are in that queue had just come out of an ANC committee meeting. Just talk to us about the dynamics that we are seeing in the party, in the province particularly.
Yes, of course, we cannot talk about KwaZulu-Natal in isolation. The reality of the matter is that there have been a number of mistakes that have been made by the ANC political leadership in different spheres, NEC, NWC, PWC, PECs, at different levels, even at branch levels. For instance, when it comes to the nomination process, one would have expected that since we have had elections since 1994, by now we would know what our problems are and where the glitches are and try to address those before they resurface. In this case, you had more than 200 branches, of course, complaining about irregularities in terms of the nomination process. Then the question becomes, were we not aware that we have had similar problems in the past? And then depending on the answer we get from there, what did we do to prevent a similar situation from happening? So I think that as much as there is a determination from the political leadership of the ANC to address these issues, I don't think they've done enough. Because if they had done enough, we wouldn't be having so many problems. The issue of failing to pay staff, that is a different matter altogether, which I think has its own problems, by the way, because no one can afford to wake up in the morning, go to work, month end, there is no salary. That, in fact, affects people both physically and emotionally, and that might be another contributing factor if the ANC doesn't address that issue, let alone the fact that there are already these factional politics that are happening, and then, of course, the fact that some people are disgruntled with the manner in which the nomination process was handled. Some saying that they had nominated individuals, but then at the end of the day, those individuals' names were removed from the list, and they don't have a clear explanation as to what had happened. So the onus then is on the leadership at a national level to come down to the provinces, including KwaZulu-Natal, and explain in a situation whereby a name that had been suggested by the branches does not make it to the final list. Explain to the people as to what had happened. If you are implementing the 2017 resolution, that if you have cases against you, you then have to step aside until you have cleared your name. Let that be explained to the branches, because these are the people who had nominated those individuals. Without that explanation, there is more speculation, and speculation is more dangerous than the actual fact. So I think the leadership then has to come up and then show that they deserve to be in those leadership positions by averting some of these problems.
Well, we certainly hope so, Prof. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, my sister.